I remember I was talking to my boss on the phone, about to lose my job because they're running out of money. And I remember not being able to hear her properly. And I was like, like my head and the rash and like everything going on. I got off that call and I just started crying. And it was like this, it was a very like kind of a spiritual experience. I remember it just felt like I was dying. And I remember that's when this kind of like awareness came through, where it was like, you can choose to live or you can choose to die. And what's also weird is when I was a kid, I always had this feeling, like I always say, I couldn't visualize my life past like a certain age. And I always had this weird feeling that I was going to die pretty early, like, 35 or it was like just a weird feeling. And I remember that point felt like the point where I was maybe going to die. And then it just all of a sudden, it was like getting this like weird, like download, totally sober. And it was all of a sudden, like everything just kind of came to me around like life and purpose and what I was doing. And like, everything, like this awareness of like, we only live once. And so I remember coming out of that moment being like, kind of like renewed, like, okay, well, how am I going to live this life? Oddly, I went to Burning Man that year for the first time. It's like, I do believe that, and then it's never, I mean, knock on wood, I have no idea what it ever was. I do think it was maybe it was a parasite of sorts, but like, why did no one ever find it? I have no idea.
I mean, maybe it was your job that was the parasite.
Well, I think it was a combination of a lot of things. Cause now that I've been coaching people for long enough, like I've seen this with so many of my clients. Like I've had clients come to me with chronic illnesses or, fatigue or tired, just tired all the time or depressed. I mean, depression's huge. And when they start to make these simple changes in their life, all of a sudden, like those things clear up. And it's like, well, it's not always just like chemical imbalance or, like an actual physical manifestation. I mean, there's many best-selling books written on this fact that our body is the one it's trying to tell us something. And if something is off in the body, it's usually related to something emotional or something that's coming up to be like looked at and seen and then dealt with.
And I could see this after leaving the job, of course, that it was the job that was just draining, because I remember whenever I quit, I had this surge of just energy. I was like, oh, I need to quit. Just total alignment would be the best way to say it. And it was just like, vibrating, every hair on your body kind of vibrating like, yes, this is what we've been trying to tell you.
Yeah, that's actually happened to me too. Back when I had a job job and the same thing started to happen. And I've seen this with so many people, like it's the energy depletion. I mean, the way I see it, and I often say this, where I say, if you don't start aligning with your soul, it's like, the universe is going to do something to you, for you. And I do believe that's what it is. I mean, it's like, it really is like eating yourself alive. The last like job corporate job I had, it was the same thing where I got very lucky. It was this, unlike the rest of my career, it was actually a very easy job with very minimal. It was like typical like 9 to 5, when I spent most of my career working like crazy long hours, and they were paying really well and the job was quite easy, but I hated it. It was really boring. I hated the company. I hated everything that company stood for. And I wish I could name names, but it was like one of the most evil companies on the planet. And everything about it was sucking my soul. Like I would literally walk around. It was like a scene in a movie. I would walk around and see all these people like literally just sitting on Facebook all day. And I was like, why are we all getting paid really well to like do nothing? This is so weird. Like there's not even enough work for us to do. It was like this big illusion. And, the company's kind of gone under by now, but I remember being at that point where I was like, and all my friends are like, oh, you've got to just, suck it up and like, just stay there as long as you can, because it's so easy and you're getting paid well. But then I remember it was like the most depressing, 6 months of my life. I was like, this is terrible.
Interesting parallel that I'm starting to see here, though, is what we kind of were talking about earlier when you were saying, you're getting like these little nuanced pokes from the universe telling you to start like a psilocybin or psychedelic entrepreneur type coaching program, and then bring that back to what we're saying now, where it's like, start taking the small steps. Do you feel like, and maybe the timeline's a little messed up in my head, but were those messages coming to you before kind of the corporate job, A, and then B, like, do you feel like had you taken those steps earlier, you wouldn't have never kind of experienced those near-death experiences?
Yeah, I actually think that's exactly what happened. I actually had thought of, so my first business was this running apparel business. Well, I actually had a little business before then, but it didn't last long. But I launched this running clothing brand. I had been thinking about that for about 8 years before I started it. Like, it was just kind of kept coming through. And then, but it was like, oh, I can't do that. Oh my God, no, that's so scary. And so I had already taken like some steps towards entrepreneurship with a previous business while I was working in corporate. And that's when I started noticing like the energy come in, where I was like, me and this girl had started this other clothing project. And even though it didn't actually interest me, it was like her idea and I just helped her with it and we did it together. But I remember how much it changed my energy and made me feel better about my job. And I was like, wait, maybe I can start a business while working. Like that was the ideal, where it's like I needed money to survive, but I could actually feel that like inspiration and like, new energy and like a newfound meaning in my life by doing something that I actually wanted to do. So that's how it started for me, is that I felt that I got the bug. And then by the time I was already working at startups, working in like these small startup companies, I was like, well, wait a second. If this person can just be a founder of a company and this person, like how are they any different than me? And that's where I started really saying to myself, like, wait, I am now helping run this startup company, even though it's not my dream, it's her dream or his dream. And that's when I was like, well, wait, I can do it too. They're really not much different than me. And honestly, most of the people I work for were like around my age. Like there I was with like, this 12-person startup, whereas like the founder was 30 something years old. And I'm like, well, how is he any different? He was a guy with an idea. And the only difference was that he wasn't afraid to start. And so that's what really got me serious, where I was like, you know what? I have to start this running clothing company, because if I don't at least try it, I will never know I'll never know if it works.
You have clients who start your program and then lose their job when they start it. And they're like, oh, I guess I have to go all in, versus what I've noticed in my life, and not just with like job side of things, but also with relationships, where like the idea of letting go. I've noticed with me that it's a lot more that I feel like I have to make the switch for myself almost, where like with my job, I was like all or nothing. It was like, all right, I have to quit and just figure it out afterwards. Or, with the idea of letting go, like it was something where I had to make the choice to let go of it. And like I was still trying to fight the universe almost. And so I guess I was curious with your opinion on something like that, like this idea of I need to make the choice versus the universe just, okay, well, you've kind of quote unquote done enough, and so I'll take the rest out for you so that you have to kind of go this direction.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I always say, look, like the more in tune you are, where you can pay attention to all the signs and the synchronicities and like actually choose from a point of like the spirit guiding you, right? Like, I mean, I do believe that our soul is being guided and, there is an alignment. And so when you start to pay attention and see things, then it's like, oh, okay, like you can maybe make it a little easier on yourself by working with it versus resisting it, which maybe, yeah, for some people it might mean doing like, like leap and the net will appear kind of, scenarios, which, I always say to people, if you can do that without creating more anxiety and fear, then totally do it. But the problem is most people just get so caught up in their head and the anxiety and the fear, that then it actually makes things worse. And then they're actually out of more alignment because now they're just freaking out constantly. I believe it's, I think now after so many years of going through the ups and downs, like now I can see things when they're happening and I'm able to work with it. Like even the worst of the worst, like I went through a breakup last year. I just went through a crazy experience with COVID. I've gone through some business stuff and it's like, oh, okay. Like I can see it now. I can usually see the lesson in it while it's happening. And I can see like, oh, this is why I need to go through this, because there's something to be healed and there's an evolution. And so the more I think there's an awareness of, I actually just wrote an email about this to my audience yesterday about the contraction and the expansion, and to actually like learn to ride the waves. Like, just like, you can try to push against it and make it more hell, hell on earth, or like in Buddhism, they say it's like the double arrow. Like, you already have an arrow in your heart. You can shoot another arrow in and make it worse, or you can like surrender to the one arrow, like maybe pull it out lightly. And I think that's the key. And that's how I've made it through a lot of crazy initiations and dark nights with a lot more pleasure, with a lot more like, oh, okay.
If you want to take us to the next level, that's something that I've even really been talking about with my dad, where he's got his, side of the team. He believes in certain things that are going to be good for the country. But at some level, for me, it's like, well, why are we putting so much power and so much belief into one person to kind of fix all these problems? It's like I only believe that this one person can do it. I only believe that. And it's like, to me, there's a level of like, you're absolving all of your power. You're giving it to somebody else, to something else.
Yeah, this is, I think the conversation around like what true sovereignty is going to come up, because, a lot of people think sovereignty is like, screw you, I'm all for myself. And that's actually not what it is. But it's really this connection to, like connection, like, because I think this whole earth is so disconnected, but connection to a God, a higher power, spirit, and connection to the earth. And then ourselves, and really just knowing that like this connection of like my relationship with what I believe to be in a greater power is like really where it's at. And if I just look inward, we are not giving away our power constantly. Because I agree, I've seen this so many times where it's like, okay, now we have a finger to point at Putin. Now we have a finger to point at, I don't know, Fauci. And now we have a finger to point at Trump, and now we have a finger to point at Biden. It's like there's always something, and it's like, well, wait a second, like, what if everybody pointed their fingers inward, like including Putin and Trump and Biden and all the guys, like all the powers that be? Like, imagine what potential we could have.